What time is it? I asked. Juanito shrugged his shoulder as if to say, why speak? He smiled a quiet, sad look. There was a yesterday, you see today. For sure there'll be a morrow. He knows only the dawn, the halfway house of noon, infinite evening, sunset and sleepy night. And I just love that little one. And it's actually, I could call that time of day Galway or Mayo, because there is this same relationship in terms of time and people. And in Western Ireland, there's a little, I usually run around doing far too much, and someone said to me at 11 o'clock one night when I finally got to their house, and she was on the phone calling some people, and I had just arrived that morning from New York, and I was really wanted to go to bed. And she said, all right, we'll rest at the Shannon, forget time. So this, as I say, could have been an Irish poem. And he was very much thinking about Ireland when he was over. Here's another poem which was published in Poetry Magazine in 1935. From the mountainside, a ledge walked into the hard, grey light of noon as a cloud parts. With easy stride it took to a beaten way toward the cottonwoods splashed green. Greeting came without a greeting's word. An envoy of the peace of hills passed softly on moccasined soles and vanished low on the arroyo's brim. The tawny earth was made more of earth, strong sense of greeny deerskin sage made rich the low ground breeze. There rock slopes massed, remote but near, mountain shades outstretched, angels cool in welcome depth, a glow within our now more human clay, radiance without, earth spell, hill gift. And they were published in poetry in 1935 and 1936, and when he went back to Ireland, some of them were published in Dubliner magazine, but basically he didn't continue his poetry in later life because he was hell-bent on trying to get this book published, which had been rejected by American publishers, and he became published in Ireland. So also, I just want to give some reflections on, these are my reflections, but I dare say, taken up by some of the observations which I've read in Paula's diary, and particularly as in terms of the relationship between what his affinity would have been with Native Americans and the Irish. And he would have said that we were both colonized peoples, invaded and had been conquered. And you know who the conqueror would be in America. Their land, that vital commodity of life, had been usurped through treaties and other things which weren't accepted. Their tribal laws, such as the High Kings of Ireland, who were abolished, and the Brehon law of Ireland. A new law was imposed by Gunn. Their old religion, which was in a certain, well, certainly the English condemned the Catholic Church, and they wouldn't allow boys to be educated to go to universities to come back as priests. And so for 2 centuries almost, Ireland had very few priests, but the old sense of religion was continued. And so that old religion was condemned by the British system. The educational system was totally restructured. The new language was imposed, English, on Irish and on the local Indian languages. The names were changed. So people, and I've read up the diaries of Native Americans who were sent to school in Pennsylvania and had to come back and were really disowned by their own tribe once they came back. Their heritage was somewhat condemned in terms of their dance, music, craft, ceremony, and legend. But ironically, that material is the material that lived on. In Irish society, there were very few books. But the music, I mean, books took money and print and circulation and people to sell. But music just spread, and athletics spread, and legends spread, because you had people who could remember and tell them. So both of those made a very commonality with the Native Americans. They both were not really driven by commercial success. There was another sense of ethos of why you were here on Earth and what you should do. And basically your values were based on a more spiritual level than on what so many other people believed in. Anyway, so here is one of the things he did in fall of 1929 was go around with his diary and see people. A very rare image of father taken by the Goldens. In his diaries, he explains with great detail the sense of the language, vegetation, and roads. I mean, he describes almost in a novelistic sense what the details of the people, their clothes, and their characters, and started telling some of the conversations which he had with people. And these were all, I think, in a build-up to learning how to write. And so he would be writing as taking a diary as an exercise, and then writing in the reverse end of that same book what his story for on another man's wound was. So he was learning on the go, so to speak. He attended many ceremonies and war dances, and particularly the Shalako. He went off to the Navajo and Hopi, and he has some of his sketches, which I include here, just included in his diary, and the many more that come. You can see some of the problems I have in trying to read what his writing is. So in the spring, he moved down to Santa Fe, and ironically enough, I mean, we have this expression of a small world, and that's usually a sort of a modern term, but can you believe that Ernie O'Malley's first cousin from Ireland, who would later become a Dominican nun, was living in New Mexico and in Santa Fe in 1930 and said, "Hi, Ernie." He'd been in touch with her. "Come on up. I'm the librarian for the Women's Santa Fe Library." So he came up and stayed with her, and through her met many of the people in the Santa Fe Society, including Raymond Otis and Dorothy Stewart, Margaretta, Alice Corbin Henderson. Alice Corbin Henderson, in The Small World We Live, was a co-editor of Poetry Magazine with Harriet Monroe in Chicago. And so father's letters to Harriet to get his poetry published were, of course, based with these deductions from Alice Corbin. And we have the documentation from, he gave some lectures on James Joyce and Irish literature and history at the house of Raymond Otis, and then subsequently there were 4 lectures given in the Hacienda, and this is sometimes referred to as Hacienda, and other times as exactly. And I sort of like to conjecture that indeed, since at that time this residential area was a residence for artists, that Theodora Goddard might have been one of these residents who was living here, and that father might also have been at that time. But that's how he would have met Dorothy, and Dorothy had expressed a desire to go back to Mexico. And of course, Mexico was somewhat deemed unsafe, and it was very nice to have a gunman be with you. And after some conversations with Ernie, she would have discovered that he was the ideal gunman. Knew how to shoot. I should add in the footnote that he wasn't a very good shot, and that's one of the reasons he got wounded several times. But anyway, he nevertheless was a male presence in a car driving, and Mexican society. He never had any difficulty in their car. This was a letter written by Dorothy to the Golden family upon arrival in Mexico City on January 6, 1931. And the top writes, "Passing the bottle," you see? And I don't know whether Dorothy was too tired at that time, but she did this very nice sketch of father, which I sort of blew up here, And this shows her talent, in terms of the accuracy. I mean, getting a single line like that is one of the most difficult things that artists have to do with. Because when you do with a pen, hey, that's it. No mistakes. So she really caught his intensity, his glasses, I guess I could stand in front of there and sort of be somewhat the same. But anyway, so in Mexico, I call them the Three Musketeers. They were armed with pens and paints, and brushes, and charcoal. And I saw some today of the charcoal drawings that she did in Mexico when my father drove her there in 1931. That was really, truly exciting. They had significantly different means, and I've ran into father's accounts of that trip where he was impecuniously employed to be a driver, and he would occasionally get a little bit of money. But again, in the sensitivity of the hierarchical class of senior and junior and all of that, the ladies would eat at Sanborn's, which is a very distinguished South American place to eat, and father would be sitting down eating tacos at some other stand. And he also said that he far preferred to eat tacos than to have to suffer the indignity of having someone pay for their dinner. I don't have those problems. So I'm open for any invitations. But he kept extensive daily diaries of all his encounters, and he stayed. Hart Crane was an American poet on a Guggenheim Scholarship down there, as was Catherine Ann Porter. And when Hart Crane went back because his father was sick or was dying, he took over Hart Crane's apartment in Mexico City. He would have known, he had great interest in folklore from the early 1919. He broadly read as a student in folklore, and he knew Francis Stewart, who was an American folklorist, who had gone down to Mexico City and wrote that the famous put out publications called Mexican Folklore. And he picked up, again, he didn't have money to take photographs because you have to have a camera, pay for development, and keep them. But he did, however, go around to people, and so he got a bunch of Tina Modotti photographs and a whole bunch of other things, about 350 photographs from that period, and they're really very evocative of the arts, the rural community that he would have seen and experienced and wrote about. And he visited archaeological and religious sites. He ran into Eisenstadt, who was making a movie down there. Anyway, a very exciting life. They come back to New Mexico in 1930. Told you about having to swim away across the way to get back in here. Again, for economic reasons, he wasn't earning money, but he found that there was in Chimayo there was a Catalan or a Basque priest, and father had been the Irish ambassador to the Catalan people back in 1925-26, and so I'm sure he was allowed to stay somewhere in Chimayo. So Chimayo had been, he's written poetry about Chimayo, and he loved his stay there. Actually, part of that was he got away from the crowd of Santa Fe, where he felt quite suffocated from, because he had to perform. He really wasn't a good performer. He couldn't do what I'm doing tonight or this afternoon, and unfortunately some of the comments about his performance were, we hope he does a better show next time. But I mean, he just couldn't stand on his feet and do the PR stuff. He came back from Chimayo, the Golden family. And some of you might not know that the educational system in New Mexico in 1930 to 32 was sort of dissolved because there wasn't enough funds to have schools. And so the Goldens invited father to tutor the 3 children. So he moved back into their house near Rancho, the Taos, and he lived there and tutored the children. He also met Paul Strand, who became a lifelong friend of his, and Paul took this photograph of father and many others, and we used to stay with Paul Strand in Paris in the 50s when they finally got caught up.